Hello there. No, you are not helping to save the NHS if you pay to go private, and that's a fact. There are many people out there who think that if we either divert NHS patients into the private sector, or if the wealthier chose or were forced to use private healthcare services, then there'd be more NHS left for everyone else. I keep hearing this being touted by those that can afford to go private, and it boils my The real truth is that everyone who elects to go private bumps someone on the NHS further back down the queue. And it's all because the private sector uses NHS doctors to provide their services. Yes, those that pay for private healthcare are diverting resources away from the general public and onto their, now prioritised by money, requirements. That's right, they've bought themselves to the front of the queue. They're not there at the front of the queue because of medical need, but because they have wads of dosh. Now, a few people doing this in normal times is tolerable, but during a time of a national health crisis, not tolerable. And I've even heard people on the TV boasting that that's what they've done to save the NHS. The private healthcare sector has no spare capacity of its own that can be reallocated to NHS patients. It works the other way round. Wealthy people's money removes NHS capacity in order to service those that have used their money to get priority. Don't believe me? Here's what the Centre for Health and Public Interest, the CHPI, said last June when everyone was saying we should buy up private health wards to help with the pandemic. Over the past year, a number of multi-billion-pound contracts have been struck with the private hospital sector to provide services to NHS patients. Those involved in promoting these deals speak of the private sector helping the NHS with extra capacity to clear the huge post-COVID backlog of patients waiting for treatment. But this language, which is repeated across the media, conceals a crucial fact. The private hospitals can only do this work by using NHS consultants. They themselves have no doctors. Oh yes. So the more that wealthy people dip into their wallets to get themselves to the front of the queue, the more that poorer patients will be forced further to the back. And the CHPI continued, to treat patients at all, the great majority of private hospitals rely entirely on NHS staff working outside their NHS hours on a self-employed basis. In fact, the business model of almost all private hospitals in the UK depends on not having to employ surgeons or other clinicians themselves, a strategy which allows them to keep their labour costs low and their operating profit margins high. And then there's this little snippet. So when the private hospital sector is said to be helping the NHS by carrying out additional healthcare services, it is actually the other way round. The NHS is helping private hospitals. And the CHPI gives a good example of this. It points out that the government did a pandemic deal with the private sector and bought up its entire capacity at a cost of 400 million quid a month, covering not only its running costs but also all the interest payments on its debt, saving some companies from a serious risk of failure after COVID wiped out demand from private patients. Oh, that the hospitality sector had had that help. But 2/3 of that massively expensive private capacity was not used, because the consultants in the private sector had been redeployed to cope with COVID patients. And the CHPI reiterated, the key resource is not hospitals, but consultants, and of those, the private sector has None. So basically, our money was spent on keeping private medicine afloat, doing virtually nothing, instead of on the NHS doing something. And it may also explain why the Nightingale hospitals were never used properly. And in conclusion, the CHPI said, "The reality is that instead of the private sector stepping in to lend the NHS a hand, this is a further lifeline extended to the private healthcare industry by providing a steady income stream via the NHS. This is simply the continuation of the trend of the NHS propping up the private healthcare industry at the cost of long-term investment in core public services." And now people are talking about bumping themselves to the front of the sick queue ahead of the poor while claiming they are doing it for the good of the NHS and the good of the nation. And many doctors who work in the private sector will be quite happy with that. But if you do go private, when you walk through the private surgery door, you'll very likely be faced with exactly the same doctor that told you last week that there was a 2-year waiting list for him to deal with you on the NHS. And go private in the full knowledge that by doing so, someone else has been disadvantaged. So what's your opinion on going private to save the NHS? Please like and comment below. Please subscribe and like this video, buy a mug and support me on Patreon or PayPal, and thank you for watching.